Wilson!
Marty Wilson.
Marty Wilson.
Marty Wilson, author and resilience expert Marty Wilson.
The resilient Marty Wilson.
Because we've always done it that way is no reason to keep doing anything. When you refuse to change, you don't hold on to the past, you just lose the future. Thank you.
Marty, how are you, mate?
Excellent, mate. I'm stuck at home, homeschooling a 16, 13 and 8-year-old boy, like 3 boys at home. So, how do you think I am, brother?
Yeah, this current lockdown is putting people through their paces a bit. It tests out your skill set, huh?
Yeah, it's funny, I found myself, particularly with the 3 boys, just really needing to soften a bit as a male. I'm a pretty big softy at the best of times anyway. But just the normal rules just have to go out the window a bit, and you just have to be a little bit more. So you want chicken goujons and potato gems 3 nights in a row for dinner. Like if you guys are happy to cook them, that's absolutely fine. As long as you throw some veggies or salad in it with it or something like that, that's absolutely fine, lads.
Parenting's funny, isn't it? Because I have a little boy, I've come to it quite late in life, or certainly compared to my parents. And there was a book written by one of my former colleagues, Commando Dad. And it's a real line to tread. And your work on resilience really gets me thinking about, when am I teaching my son the commando, what we used to say, man up, let's say people up now, this way, son, come on. And when am I just being an overbearing, insensitive bully that he's going to grow up to resent, which is obviously none of us would want that. But one little thing I've noticed, if I ask him to do something but I don't do it with him, he gets really upset. Okay. And so I have to come down off my kind of Marines bit and go, oh, okay, son, right, this is, and I'm just trying to do what I think is best. Marty, have you found that?
I mean, I've got my youngest boy he was diagnosed with a bit of anxiety and OCD, and so this whole lockdown sort of thing, it's all very different for him, and it really is. Like, I really have found that the more I turn into my dad when I'm trying to get him to do what I know he should be doing or whatever, the more he just explodes, and the more just using those techniques, like, wow, mate, you seem really upset. What's going on? Like, just the sort of stuff that comes really naturally to his mum, that I'm just having to learn that, because it's just, you try to be a really effective parent to get the job done that needs to get done. And if I do the finger pointing, it's just, he just turns into the Hulk and rips the shirt off and everything. So it just, in the interest of just getting the job done, you got to learn new ways to do things.
Why do we turn into our dads? So that's the thing. I've done everything in my life to take my parents' good points, of course, but to leave all the crock of what behind. And yet sometimes you listen to yourself and you just think, oh my God, that is exactly how my dad would have dealt with that situation. And I don't want to be that. So
it's that old metaphor, isn't it? That, when if you squeeze an orange, all that can come out is orange juice, because that's what's inside. And so, when we're squeezed, what comes out is what's inside. And so you just got to keep working on what's inside, so that when you're squeezed, what comes out is a little bit better than it was before.
So, Marty, let's talk more about the kind of philosophy, psychology, resilience, life coaching type stuff in a moment. I think you're very fortunate as a professional and as a speaker, which you do so well. I've watched your TED talk, which was
Thank you.
Incredibly confident on stage, and you've got the funnies and all the stuff that speaking agencies look for. And it's very good on your LinkedIn profile, which is how we met, because it says Comedian of the Year, right? Which that to me is so impressive. It sounds like the wrong word. What I mean is I completely appreciate what that means and what it takes to get that award. In recent times, and the reason I started my podcast was because I liked the Joe Rogan podcast so much, and I liked the fact that he could just pick cool guests who he wanted. And when I learned that he's a comedian and the way he talks about comedy, that you immediately realize, well, as a writer, my God, comedy, it's an art. It's so in depth. There's some people that are going to be naturally good at it and just need to polish their act. There's some people that are never going to be good at it. That's just, it's the same with writing. And there's people in the middle that can learn to get better. But overall, what a massive art form comedy is. What a brave thing to do.
I guess for me, mate, it was one of those things, the people ask me, like, what's the biggest gift that being a comedian for 10, 11 years gave me? And it was the ability to fail in public and not care and I guess the thing, I guess I was very lucky because I had an older brother who was like better at sport than me and smarter than me. So I think, so my method for getting attention in the world, as every kid wants, was to be funny. And so I started practicing being funny at an age when I didn't care. If I told a joke and it didn't work, I'd just try and think of another one. Like when you're 8, 9, 10, 11, you just don't care. You just keep until the family laughs at you. So all those sort of open mic nerves and, saying jokes that completely die on your ass and that sort of stuff, it just, I had all that training when I was young enough to not care. But then when getting up, doing it in front of a crowd, like I sort of had a bit of a natural thing built into me that just like, your joke doesn't work. You just, stand there and try another one. I sort of had that really early on, I had it really smashed into me that you on stage isn't you as a person. And so if, it's like an artist who does a painting, if you put it up there, some people are going to like it, some people aren't, and that's okay. Like, the worst thing you can do is try and do a painting that everybody likes, because then it'll just be so bland, no one will like it. And so, I was very lucky early on to just have that idea of, just chuck it out there. You'll find your audience. And the same is true with speaking and podcasts and all those sort of things, that is putting a little bit of your heart out there for people to look at. You'll find your audience. Just be open and honest, and you will find your audience.
It's so true. You say that, and I'm a lifelong learner. What some people would probably call me a slow learner, me. But I say that to my partner. When I look at my YouTube channel, which has really been pivotal in changing a lot of how I present my career and who I am and who I want to be with a public face. But I've said to my partner, it's like you're trawling with a net. You're not going to get everybody, but you don't want that, because enough people will be caught in a net. Sounds really bad, but for want of a better analogy, you are going to get those people that are attracted to you because they just like you. And so if you keep doing it long enough and you're sincere and you have people's best interests at heart, that you don't have to worry about the mudslingers, I suppose.
And it's true, sometimes, particularly, I'm a speaker now, like in speaking, sometimes you'll get people book you just because they like you, that they'll actually book you in spite of your topic rather than because of it. It's just like, I just want my people to see him, he's good, I like him, and you do, and so, and the people who, over rehearse everything about their personality, whether it comes to, sportsmen and women talking on, post-match interviews, or people on TV, or comedians or speakers, or anything where your personality gets exposed to the public. Where I think when people are overproduced and over-rehearsed, I suppose they find their audience as well, but I don't think you ever get that really loyal audience that really loves you to bits.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Australia or the UK? Because I know you've spent time in both places.
You know, I'm an Aussie. I grew up over here, but then I was actually following. I just started doing stand-up about a year earlier, and I was following the Rugby World Cup around in 1999. And I'm a big rugby fan, and that was back in the days when the Aussie dollar bought like 33 pence, not you know a lot more like it does now. And so I did some stand-up gigs over there just to help pay for the trip. And it's one of those lovely scenes where an agent saw me and said, "Oh, look, I think you're great. You know, when can you move over here? I'll fill your diary." And I dragged my then English girlfriend, now wife, you know, kicking and screaming. She'd just been sponsored as a nurse out here in Australia. Dragged her kicking and screaming back to the UK with a promise that it would only be for 2 years. And we ended up staying for 8 and got married and had our first child over there. Yeah, so I think I miss the UK more than my wife does, to be honest. I think she loves living out here in Australia. But I really miss just the changing of seasons and just the sense of humour of the British people and the different people in different parts of Britain. Oh, my light's just fallen off. There you go.
Brilliant.
We're live.
There you go. Live comedy, folks.
Yeah. So there we go. I think I miss Britain more than she does. She maintains that I just missed my self-indulgent stand-up comedian's lifestyle, but I really miss the country of Britain.
Okay.
And,
so it is true then that England is a much better country than Australia.
Well, I mean, it's like we were only saying the other day, my wife and I, we got 3 boys. I can't imagine the coronavirus lockdown back in our 3 up 2 down semi-detached house in Kingston upon Thames in outer London. I can't imagine going through it there. Because I used to get that SADS, that seasonally adjusted disorder thing in February every year. Let alone if we're locked inside with 3 ridiculously energetic kids, like 2 of whom would have had to have been sharing a room and everything. Just, oh my God, I can't imagine it now.
So here's the thing. I don't want to say any names here because that's not fair, but I do see some comedians and they take it really seriously. They take themselves in the comedy role very seriously. But here's the thing. And I don't think it's like a preference thing. I just think, mate, you're not funny. You just haven't got it. It's nothing. It's not a criticism of your effort. Nothing like that. It's just, I'm not a great believer, but I think some people are funny and some people aren't. And
it's one of those things. I used to say there'd be so many backstage conversations on the comedy circuit about what's the right sort of funny and like who does the right type of comedy and that sort of thing. And there's, comedians, and there's, and I think I used to always say, like on a bill, if there's 5 people on a bill, whoever made the crowd laugh the most tonight, they were the best comedian tonight. And that's it. It's not like music is a matter of taste or, being a chef, cooking is a matter of taste, something like that. But, in a comedy club, there's no hiding. Like someone made the crowd laugh tonight the most, and they were the best comedian on the night. And so, coming back to, I guess, what we were saying before, that, some people find their audience and it's a really small audience because of, the type of comedy they do. And they've got to be okay with that or change the type of comedy you do. There's just no arguing that not a big enough percentage of the population finds you funny. Either change your style, change your act, or get better at it so that more people do find you funny, or just, give it up, mate.
Well, it reminded me there a bit of what Doug Stanhope says. He says, I pick my audience, mainly a drunken one, that he said, because they come and see me. He said, I don't do impromptu because if you put me in front of a bunch of strangers, they're just going to think I'm a real asshole.
Yeah. And he's one of those guys who's like like everyone from, Bill Hicks, to a strong Aussie guy called Brendan Burns in Australia, who won the Perrier about 10 years ago. Like, they real comedians, and comedians absolutely love the stuff they do, but they don't get as wide an audience because they're just brutally truthful and incredibly vulgar and incredibly rude, and that's their style, and that's comes from inside their heart, and they just got to accept their place in the. Whereas your Michael McIntyres and that sort of stuff, very GP, general public, they're always going to do better because they never offend anyone, and so it's just
I know which one I prefer. I don't want to come out of any of his material because I probably will offend people. There is a problem in society. I always say to people, I've got to tell my truth, because if I don't, I'm denying somebody out there who maybe like me in their life has struggled with issues, drugs, mental health, whatever it is. And like, if I hold back because I'm worried about what these 10 people, these drop in the ocean people might think, then I'm being a coward to you. And I don't want to be, I don't want it on my gravestone. Coward. Anything else, just not coward. And but it is really becoming an issue, isn't it? Especially in comedy. You can't just, and didn't they say, you'll know when you're in totalitarianism because no one will be able to laugh. They'll take the comedy away. And that's what's happening.
I guess I can see both sides of the argument. I'm going to prevaricate and flip-flop a little bit in terms of comedy in the 1980s, for example. It was like, parts of it were incredibly funny and everything, but there's an expression in comedy called punching down, where people who are in a lesser socioeconomic group than you, it's just beneath you to make fun of them. Whereas there's lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff you can make fun of. And so the thing I say to comedians when they ask me is, just remember the saying, if you ain't one of them, don't make fun of them. Because you just don't have to. There's lots of ways that you can be funny.
It's like my degree is in youth work, so I'm passionate about young people, community, what people might term equal rights, that kind of thing. And obviously, being a former druggie, I'm from a minority myself, right? A abused minority. And when I hear this, my point is, when you go through the course I did in uni, you do a lot on anti-discrimination, right? And the trouble is now, you can see where anti-discrimination is getting confused for political correctness, and they're two almost completely separate things,
Yeah.
And I
would say, if you ain't, you can make jokes about being a druggie. Like, I'm losing my hair, I can make drugs about ball buggers, or and people who aren't, then sure, you can, but just be open to the fact that there's going to be people that you annoy, and if you're okay with that, then go ahead and do it and accept the consequences. But there's so much stuff you can laugh at. The world is funny enough without
you having to. Like my philosophy is simple: is just don't say anything that's going to make somebody else's life or their community harder for them. You can make fun of a lot of stuff about a lot of people. It doesn't mean when they wake up in the morning their life's going to be harder because of what you said. But so is it frightening that, public speaking, they say, is people's biggest fear, even more so than death. But to get up and then have to make people laugh, how was that your first few times?
I was like always the the kid who got up at school assembly and made fun of the principal, or did like 18th birthday speeches and 21st birthday speeches, volunteered for debating at school. It's something I've just always really, really enjoyed. I have many, many memories as a kid of, just sitting down watching Monty Python and the Goodies and comedy shows with my family together. Like, it was just a real one of those things that my family really loved. Laugh everything, like Two Ronnies to Morecambe and Wise, and like all like, I was tiny kid when all these things were on, even repeats. But just that idea of just that magic of a whole room laughing together at the same thing, just that uniting wonderful force that it is. And so once I learnt that I had a bit of a talent for doing that, it was something, I just had to explore, because the feeling when it goes well is worth 15, 20 times when it doesn't. It really is. It's so much fun. Being the person who made everyone feel that way is just, it's such a wonderful moment. I'll absolutely love it.
Oh, no, it's nice to hear you say that. What, alcohol and drugs is synonymous, isn't it, with stand-up comedy, at least on that sort of LA scene. Yeah. And a lot of, we've lost a lot of beloved comedians to drugs and alcohol overdoses. Was that ever an issue for you?
I've seen drugs. I've never really. I think coming up. See, I was a pharmacist. I grew up. I'm a third generation pharmacist by training, and so I guess I knew too much about it to really get into it too much, I think. But certainly, I've tried most things over the years, but it's more, and saw loads of it. I think it's more like people ask me, like, what are comedians like? And it's like just asking, what are people like? If you got 1,000 comedians on the comedy scene in London, there'll be a few people who, get in and try some drugs. There'll be, most who don't. There'll be, it would probably be quite similar to the regular population, except that it's much more available on the comedy scene, just because it's showbiz, So, people get offered that sort of stuff all the time.
It's
so
funny
I wouldn't sort of say it's or maybe they just didn't do it in front of me. I don't know, because I knew I was a bit of a straighty 180. I don't know. I don't know. But I didn't. It wasn't as rock and roll as people might suspect, I think.
I was going to say that I remember someone talking about they smoked a joint before going on stage, and it kind of sent them into a panic attack. And I couldn't think of anything. It works for some people, doesn't it? I think Joe Rogan is one of those people it seems to work for. For me, I think I just stand there and freeze. What I was saying, to me, it wouldn't sound funny to myself. And I think that's...
No, I would quite regularly have 1, 2 or 3 beers before going on stage in a comedy club. It was actually one of the hardest things I discovered when I started doing speaking as opposed to doing stand-up comedy, that, you're on at 10 o'clock in the morning and like you can't have 1 or 2 beers to get your Dutch courage up before you go on stage. You've got to like, there's no green room, so you can't be backstage, sort of dancing around trying to get yourself ready, because you're just next to the stage about to go on, and you can't have 1 or 2 beers to get your confidence up either. So those first couple of years, it just felt a little bit jarring. But I was definitely probably, if I'm honest, it'd be 7, 8 nights out of 10, I would have a couple of beers before going on stage just to get the confidence up. I guess because comedy is quite those first 2 minutes can be quite gladiatorial in nature when you first get out there. Particularly, like I was an Aussie stand-up comic around the time Australia lost the Ashes for the first time in 17 years and lost the Rugby World Cup and all that to the English. And so it, there was quite a few moments there where, it was a fair bit of gladiatorial contest in the first 2.5 minutes I was on stage.
There's something you notice. I think there's something else that goes hand in hand with comedy is when people are very relaxed and you can tell they're quite sure about, or at least they give the impression they're quite sure about themselves, isn't it? Yeah. It's almost like they're just coming out to talk to you, and it's not they're coming out to present you with an act, and they really hope you're going to like it. You know, Bill Hicks, I mean, he just didn't really, he'd send people out of his audience, wouldn't he?
Yeah. I mean, and that comes from stage time, you know, just, you know, when you've done it 500, 1,000 times sort of thing, and you have, you know, a bank of really strong material. I interviewed a guy called, just chatted. When I first started, I just contacted about 15, 20 comedians that I knew were like 10 years ahead of me, and just bought them, you know, lunch or a coffee or a slice of baklava or whatever they wanted, just to have a chat. And a guy called Pete Burner here in Australia, who's a pretty big comedian here in Australia, he said the best place to get to is when you've got a bank of material about a particular subject. Like he'd experimented with a lot of drugs. He had a lot of drug material. And so he said, I'll just start talking about drugs. And if nothing funny comes out after 30, 45 seconds, I'll do a couple of lines that I know are really good, and I'll get the audience back. And then I'll just start talking again. And he would actually get to the point where he was confident enough to write new material on stage just by talking. And after a while, like, that's a, you know, really lovely place to get to, which was probably only in the last couple of years of my comedy career that I got to that point where I was just willing to just chat to the audience and see what came out, you know.
Marty, whereabouts are you? Where are you from in Australia, and where do you live now down there?
I'm originally from a town called Newcastle, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney.
I know it.
Now, and I'm now live in a place called Noosa, which is about 2 hours north of Brisbane. Now, about halfway up on the right hand side as you look at Australia. Is the easiest way to describe it.
Is that it? It's Queensland is the tropics, right? Where the Are you just?
Well, you know, Queensland. I'm about sort of 3 hours over the border into Queensland, but there's still about another 22 hours to go to the top of Queensland. Like you know, it's a like my wife's mum texted us because we had some bushfires here, those terrible bushfires over summer here, and there's some really bad ones about 500 meters that way, and then the really, really bad, massive bad ones happened in January over here. And my wife's mum texted us and said, like, oh, look, I saw there's more bushfires. Are they near you? And I said, oh, look, you know, Rosemary, Australia's a pretty big place. It's like me texting you and saying, I saw there were some bushfires in Crete. Are you okay? Like, hey, they really were that far away.
Gosh. So, yeah, I bought a surfboard in Newcastle, just so you know.
Oh, nice. Very good. Very good.
To start off my surfing career. I know career is not the right word, but my hobby. And I loved it. I loved just being able to go in the water, and it actually wasn't too warm around Sydney, but when you get up to where you are, becomes just a real pleasant thing to go surfing as often as, you know, I hired a car in Sydney, and I just worked my way up to, I think, Airlie Beach, and I had the tent in the back of the car, and I was just pitching the tent as and when, and surfing every time I wanted to. It was a really great experience. Marty, can we talk about your TED talk, your TEDx talk, because that's quite an achievement. And I gather they're quite not strict, but they have a kind of set format that they give you a lot of support to.
It is a real, I guess, because they they apply for a license. Like a TEDx event applies for a license from TED, and there's some quite strict rules about how much you can tickets. Or I think tickets have to be free. I think tickets have to be free on the day, and a certain number of tickets, and they have to, you know, lead speakers through a process to make sure that the quality on the day is. But it's such a, if anyone gets a chance or gets asked to go to a TEDx event or be part of a TEDx event, because I was very lucky. I was on sort of, I think, second or third on the day, so I just sat in the audience and watched all the other speakers, and the amazing variety of ideas in the 12 or 13 speakers that were there on the day was just an absolute pleasure to watch, let alone, you know, be a part of the event on the day. Everything from two examples I really remember were there was this one lady who they're trying to find a cure for malaria. And so when you're at school, you would do experiments in the chemistry class, and you'd get your chemicals, and at the end of it, the teacher would dispose of them properly. And it was like the same stuff they did last year and everything. They've got this program where they're getting kids to create chemicals that can be used potentially to fight malaria, just rather than do it in laboratories and create all different ones. And they send them off to a lab that tests whether they work against malaria. So like, you're actually creating a chemical that's going to be used in a trial. And so it's so much more fascinating for kids. And you can go on the website and track which chemical you're meant to be creating using today's experiment, and that sort of stuff, which is a really cool thing. And the other really cool idea on the day was, like, English is one of the hardest languages to learn. And so like in Denmark, by the age of 2.5, kids are reading to learn. Whereas in English, like even age 5, kids are still learning to read. And so this guy was proposing this new alphabet, so that just like most other languages in the world, if you see the letter C with this squiggle over it, it's always a hard C, like a K. Where if you see a C without that little squiggle over it, it's always a soft C, like a S. And so, by the age of 2.5, you use this special alphabet till kids can learn, when they get older, how English really works. Wow, and so he's invented this new, like Germans have umlauts and accents in French and all that sort of stuff. And it just makes it so much easier for kids to learn to say that word out loud and in their head as soon as they see it. And so they can be reading to learn by the time they hit school. It's just so fascinating. Just sitting back watching all these ideas was absolutely fascinating, and just a lovely process to be part of.
Yeah, I'd like to do. I'd like to do a TEDx. I try to pitch myself to the one the nearest one to me, and they ask for a subject heading, don't they? Something that's going to kind of challenge accepted ways of thinking.
Yeah.
And so mine was something like how addiction set me free. I wanted to break this stereotypical thinking that addiction has to be like a bad thing we need to avoid at all costs, where probably, like I'm sure yourself, Mai, it's just another one of life's rich experiences, and it's up to you to make of it, it's what you make of it, sort of thing. But not surprised, in my professional career, I didn't hear anything back from them. I wouldn't mind.
I'd keep trying. I'd keep trying. I'd work on your pitch. Like, it's a great, one of the keys that people ask me how to get a TED talk. It is like, come up with a real counterintuitive title like that. Like mine was Why We Should All Take Funny Seriously was the title of my keynote. And so, yours follows a similar sort of structure, how addiction can set you free, or how addiction set you free. And I'd just maybe, I'd have a work on the my 3 key takeaways and that sort of stuff, and keep refining it and keep pitching it to other ones around the countryside. Like it, because they're all very separate, independent events, and just quietly they almost never talk to each other. And so I just keep refining it and keep trying it, and then after a year, be thinking of a second one that you could do. And go back and go through the process and pitch it to all the people, all the different ones again. But like don't settle for that first no. Like keep trying, because it's a really fun thing to be a part of.
Did you have to rehearse yours many times? Are you allowed? Are you looking at a screen to see your notes, or is it just?
Yeah. No, they. It was sort of one of those things for me that. Because I sort of speak, well, not at the moment, obviously, but I speak sort of, 75, 80, 85 times a year. So I think I'm used to being up on my feet. But I was doing, because it was only 14 minutes long, I was doing like this chunk followed by this chunk followed by this chunk, not this chunk, then all this stuff, then this chunk later, then all this stuff. And then, so it was like combining bits into stuff as I didn't normally do them before. So, but I had, there was like I could see like the slides that were behind me, I could see those on a foldback screen here. And then over here, just in case I needed them, like for all the speakers, there was a, like their set list, or, like a band has a set list or something like that.
Yeah.
so they could remember the points. Yeah, 'cause I think it's in their interest to make sure you do really well. So yeah, they're very supportive, and there was a coach who coached everybody, and I was like, oh, I've been doing this for 16, 17 years, but this lady was absolutely fantastic, and she, really blew up what I had and helped me put it back together, and then let me feel like it was totally my idea to do it that way. And she was just really, really good, really, really fun. I've actually recommended her to a few speakers after that, just because she's just a really great speaking coach, and she just volunteered her time to get into the TEDx spirit and everything. Yeah, it was a really wonderful process.
The whole speaking thing is fascinating. I mean, being in the military, when you're in the Marines, you have to do public speaking by definition. You have to be able to give a lecture, and it's done in a very set way. Then I went on to do a little bit in business, and so I was talking to audiences, and it's that sort of bit of a cliche, but once you've done one or two, it just becomes so much more natural and easier. But this kind of what they're starting to call inspirational speaking or motivational speaking or life coaching, which it seems crossovers of several areas. I'm just getting into that now. In fact, I think all my gigs are going to be cancelled because of this lockdown, right? So it's not been the best of starts.
Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing now, nothing confirmed until about August or October, and even that's, they're all sort of paused or on hold or that sort of stuff. I'm doing a fair bit of virtual stuff, like doing a few, just like we are now, doing this sort of thing, because there's actually a lot of so, don't be afraid to reach out to your clients and say, are you doing any virtual stuff? Look, I got a podcast, like I'm totally set up to do this sort of thing. I could, you sort of have to make it, because I run this thing called the Speaker Business Accelerator, and we sort of teach people how to run their speaker business. And we're saying like that you need to, you can't just do your big showy keynote in front of a camera. Like you have to make it more of a discussion, more of a workshop sort of thing, and a little bit more nuts and bolts, explore the nuts and bolts of what you're talking about, rather than just, a bit more showy jazz hands and stories and all that sort of stuff. When you're on a stage with 1,000 people, it's very different to, because it feels that every person who's watching on a webinar or a Zoom call, it feels like just like the conversation we're having now, but you're having it with 50 people. I've got one on Thursday that's going to be to 350 people. And so you've got to sort of maintain that energy that we've got now. Like they say on the radio, where you talk to the listener on the radio, where you pretend there's only one person there. So you're talking that way. But So sorry, you were talking about you're just getting started.
No, it's your chat, Marty. I'm kind of taken. The money surprised me. I mean, it's bloody hell. They pay you well, don't they?
They do.
Even
when I came back from doing stand up in the UK, a really good friend of mine, Arndo, he's like quite a famous comedian here in Australia. And he took me aside about 2 months after I got back. He said, Marty, don't call it stand-up comedy. Call it corporate keynote speaking. It pays a hell of a lot better. And it really does.
Yeah. I mean, for our listeners at home or our watchers on YouTube, it literally in 4 hours work, I make more money than I have ever done writing books. For the year, 4 hours work earns me more money than I've ever earned in a previous year. But then again, I guess with that becomes the responsibility of making sure the audience goes away having learned something and to a degree having been entertained for that hour.
And that's the real key to it, that you can drop 2 or 3 while you're making them enjoy themselves for 45 minutes, 50 minutes. You can drop 2 or 3 truth bombs in a that pithy, earwormy type of way that they'll come up to you in a cafe 3 years later and say, like I talk about resilience through times of change. And one of the ways I describe, when when you refuse to change, you don't hold on to the past, you just lose the future. And so that's one of sort of the key things that I talk about. And so crafting your points into those little memorable phrases that people really hang on to, and just you can just see their eyes just going, yeah, all right, yeah, you got me there. Like that, it's really worth the effort to, I mean, any presentation, anyone who's watching this who makes any sort of presentation, whatever your 2 or 3 key points are that you want to land, make sure you express them in a really succinct and memorable and pithy type of way, so that people go away saying, yeah, when they fill out the feedback sheets and that sort of stuff, they're like, yeah, this bit was really good, that bit was really good.
Am I allowed to get it tattooed on their arm?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really they call it a segue, don't they, in comedy? I'm learning from Joe Rogan. You see, that's a good segue into talking about resilience. I know in your TED talk you talked about your partner's story.
Yep.
Was that how you first? Well, obviously, resilience is something that it's a theme that runs through us all our lives, isn't it? Whether or not we recognise it or how we shape that resilience. When did it become a feature in your sort of speaking, and you've written a series of books as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, it really was. So to recap for those who haven't seen my TED talk, it's I talk about in my Take Funny Seriously TED talk. I talk about how humour can build resilience, and it came from my wife had crippling postnatal depression after all 3 of our boys, to the point where about 8 or 9 months after the birth of our 3rd child, I came home from work one day and Ali just burst into tears over the dinner table and very quietly just slid across the table to me the goodbye letters that she'd written to myself and all 3 of our boys individually. And it was one of those things where if ever I become egotistical enough to write an autobiography, it's going to open with the sentence, unfortunately, I had a very privileged upbringing, because like I had like a really lovely childhood. Like my dad was a pharmacist, so he had a really stable income, even through, the 80s and 90s, which, had recessions and everything. And so I didn't really have any difficulties that I couldn't work out until I was about 30, and so when my wife had, this horrible time, I was just absolutely left floundering. And so it was partly the idea of, because in the TED talk, I talk about how eventually, after lots of tears and, a couple of weeks of discussions, I said, look, well, how can I help, or how can I at least not make it worse? And my wife sat there for a while and she said, we don't laugh anymore. Like we used to go along to live comedy when I was doing stand-up, and we deliberately take time to watch comedy. And so we deliberately chose to seek out those shows that made us laugh. And that, I'm not saying that was better than, she'd been on medication on and off for years. And she has been on medication on and off for years, of meditation, light exercise, all these things. But it was actually just a lot of laughter every night that lifted the clouds just that little bit, enough for her to have the energy to do those things. And it added a layer of sunshine to those things that made them just that little bit easier. And so it was that, combined with, as you say, I've got this book series called What I Wish I Knew, where I ask people if you could go back and give your younger self one bit of advice about whatever that one's about. So there's one on like health and fitness, there's one on depression, there's one on cancer, there's one on marriage, one on love, all sorts of things. And when you interview over 1,000 people and ask them if you could go back and give your younger self one bit of advice, everyone sort of says that the key to doing life well is this idea that I talk about in my keynotes, is do pain well. Like if you can handle those times in your life when you're dumped in the deep end and your previous life experience, like me, hadn't prepared me for who I needed to be and how I needed to move forward. If you can handle those times well, the good times kind of look after themselves. And so that's what everybody says when you interview people about life. And so it's like handling those crucial moments of decision. And so one of the things I talk about in my keynote is the fact that you need to build resilience before you need it. You need to, like that old Chinese proverb of, you need to dig the well before you're thirsty. You need to prepare for these things, because there's a lot of people finding out now, right now when this lockdown is on, that all these things, the retail therapy and all these things they thought were, helping them cope with life's difficulties, actually weren't really doing them much good at all. When those things were taken away, they're starting to realise that it's actually the in here and the in here is what you really need to work on for those really tough times that we all have as part of life.
Do we need to define resilience, Marty, for our audience, or does everybody know what that is these days?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different definitions of it. The way I define it in my keynote is it's your ability to keep your peace of mind through stressful times. Like, how much you can, keep that little half smile on your face through the really crappy days. And psychological research has shown that your ability to be able to maintain your peace of mind through stressful times, about 50% genetic, so blame your mum and dad, about 10% events, so 10% what happens to you, and about 40% how you think about, how you process events, how you think about what happens to you. And the great news is that there are things that everybody can learn to improve that 40%. So, 50% of it's, we all have this basic happiness set point that we sort of bound back. That's why, people win the lottery and, a year later, even like half of them lose the money, but half of those that haven't are only about 5% happier than they were before. Like, once we have our basic needs taken care of, money really doesn't do that much.
No.
And so it's your genes, 50% your genes, only about 10% what happens to you, contrary to, advertising and social media telling you that it's all about living the dream life. But it's 40% that you can actually work on to make yourself happier and improve it's the Buddhist term for it is Maitri. Like that's why about 10 years ago it was all about happiness, but what they were actually talking about was the Buddhist term Maitri, which is sort of like a combination of happiness and peace of mind and calm all blended in together. And that's what I talk about with resilience, your ability to attain that through really stressful times.
Yeah, well, it's an important thing to remember, isn't it, that you're always going to face challenges in your life, because life can be challenging. It's probably challenging when saber-toothed tigers were running at us when we lived in caves, but when you develop this kind of Zen way of being, it makes it's how you deal. It's like the arcade game where they're rolling is it Super Mario, where they're rolling the balls down at you, and you just
the Donkey Kong.
Is it Donkey Kong? That's right.
Yeah. Nice.
Also think it's worth mentioning that it's not just one resilience. It's developing your resilience for different scenarios. Would you agree with that, Marty?
Yeah.
For example, I'm very tough in many areas, physical, bring it on. I in 2018, I ran 999 miles pretty much non-stop. Whatever, and to be honest, it's not as hard as it sounds. It's just that my head's in the right place, I eat anything and everything, and I always have done, because I made a decision when I was a very young child. I didn't want to be fussy, and I wanted to take in as much of this life as I could, and I've always been that way. And obviously I had quite a tough childhood, and there was many times it was just me and a cigarette being tough, that was it, right? But I'll be the first to hold my hand up and say, some situations I've been really rubbish in, and I'm getting better, because I never stop my learning, because I'm massively finding most of my answers in kind of spiritual, in spiritual practices, you can say, which ironically very often not thinking too hard and not trying to learn the answer's like right in front of you, right?
Yeah.
So
I love the Winston Churchill quote. Almost every crisis can be solved in 20 minutes.
yes. I mean, I don't want to waffle on. I could give loads of examples, but
Well, that's interesting that you say. Where do you say you've struggled? Like what for someone who's done, some amazing challenges and got over some, some incredible internal turmoil. Where have you struggled? It's interesting you say that.
I mean, you can say we were talking about parenthood earlier. Being resilient means being able to be strict and tough, but on yourself in those times when you're interacting with other people. Like, so when it's that temptation to shout at your son and go, "Oi, you don't do it like that. Just do it like," and like I say, you're being your dad, right? That is something I work on all the time. I think because I'm ex-military as well, it doesn't help it that we just do things, and it's like there's us and there's idiots. And I recognize that I need to work on that because for the biggest reason in the world, my gorgeous little boy, so kind of these are all different areas of resilience, aren't they? Or the kind of different facets of it. Am I right, or am I kind of misunderstanding something?
Yeah, no. I guess we're all challenged by different things, different areas of life, and it's possibly to do, I think, with our upbringing and challenges. We have a bank of experience where we have built up our resilience muscles in various types of interactions, types of human situations, and I think sometimes when we haven't been through that situation before, what held us in good stead in this sort of situation is just not going to work in this sort of situation. And sometimes we're totally floored by that, and we have to pick ourselves up. So yeah, I think I know exactly what you mean. I think the phrase that I come back to again and again and again is there's this Buddhist guy called Timber Hawkeye out of the States, and he says that I think I mentioned in my TED talk, you cannot calm the storm, so stop trying. What you can do is calm yourself. The storm will pass. Yeah. And it is all about just that inner game that we all have to play,
And it's a lot of emphasis is placed on this intergenerational thing of young people these days are being mollycoddled and being protected from risk, which in itself then depletes your body's natural ability to be able to cope with risk and be resilient. It's interesting, but I would just take it back a generation and say most adults are pretty bloody rubbish as well.
I don't buy into this whole intergeneration. I mean, I remember my dad telling me that when he went to Pompeii, down in Italy, they found there was graffiti up on the wall there about how lazy young people were these days and all that sort of thing, like back in Roman days, like I think, and there was, I think it was it Cicero or someone back then talked about how, young people these days, they can't hold a decent conversation. Everybody's writing a book and, they wear their togas above their knees or something. Like it was the thing, like where it was the fashion to wear it below the knees or, or something like that, and it's just, you're like, it's a lot of, it's the boomers, having a go at this generation. But you think about, their parents, and they were like 60s and 70s flower children, and now they're having a go about how, the youngsters just don't know how good they've got it. And, like the boomers, like they lived their whole teenage and 20s through a year, post World War II, where there was, make love, not war, and all that sort of stuff, and letting your hair grow long and, rebelling against everything that had come before. And so I think it's just sort of a natural thing that, you know, every generation, you know, thinks the teenager's a complete idiot.
I wonder if that's just the same for society, though. I mean, I'll give you some examples of my pet peeves. Not that I try to focus on them, because I just try to have all negativity out of my life if I can control that. But it still amazes me when adults text you, especially when it's a text that's clearly taken them about 15 minutes to write. Because to me, texting it's a young, it's that damned modern technology that bloody pick up the phone like a human being, speak to you. Or other things, when people will just walk into a room, look down at the floor, take a seat, and it's like you're kind of, hi, you know, we're going to be on a course now for like 3 weeks. We're going to get to, so why don't you just like say hello now? Because I'm going to be with you, rather than go through this weird shyness ritual of coming in, looking at the floor, hoping no one's going to burst your shyness bubble, because we all feel shy. It's just a human thing. And it's all little things like this. Adults have lost the ability to come up and go, hi, my name's Chris. How you doing? It's just simple things. I heard you in your talk with that wonderful Julie, is it Cross?
Julie Cross, yeah.
Yeah, and she said you were talking about how when you look at the old wedding photos of the older generation Australians, how they looked fitter, healthier, how they had more resilience, because back then it wasn't really an option. You know, you had to be resilient. And I bet they came up to each other and went, "G'day, mate. How you doing?" Yeah, am I just been a bitter old man, or is that?
No, but you know, I think every generation has things about it. You know, you know, there's, while you know that is true. I absolutely agree that is true. But you know, back, you know, also, you know, back then there was a lot of intolerance for, you know, a lot more open acceptance of vocal intolerance for people who couldn't play that game because of what was going on inside them. You know, through reasons of, you know, belief, religion, sexuality, like all those sort of things, you know, and so, you know, that 10% who couldn't fit into that, "G'day, mate, how are you? Look me in the eyes and shake my hand," you know, they were quite probably absolutely crushed more by society than they are today. So like I can see both sides of the story.
I think I probably need to rescue myself a bit here. No, I get that. It's like when people say, you know, if you can't look me in the eye, it's like, no, there's lots of people who don't feel comfortable, and the handshake. I probably didn't really mean
they might have been brought up. They might have been brought up in a household where their dad said, "If you look me in the eye, I'm just going to punch you in the eye." You know,
yeah,
like, so,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
you
No,
know,
I think it's more. It's just more when it's like adults who should know better. That's my kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
It's because whenever
I
you
get
go,
it.
whenever you go, "Hello, mate," and they go, "Oh, you know, it's there." They're capable of doing it. They've just bought into this modern thing of just going through life a bit of a wet jellyfish, having no kind of, you know, no. Come on, you leave the house, say, just wave to your neighbour. But in England now, it's almost unless it's like the person right next to you who you see every day, so you have to speak to them. You just don't get to know your neighbours. Some of that. It's not everybody. It's not everybody, but there's a good proportion that will just get out the car and scurry to the front door, and it's like, dude, I've lived across the road from you for 10 years now, and you will do everything to avoid just saying, "All right, mate."
Yeah, I wonder if it's I wonder if that's you know, the massive rise of big cities and inner city living, and everyone's so busy. Yeah, I wonder what it is. I wonder what it is.
And I think our self-esteem has been purposely destroyed a lot, because if you destroy someone's internal happiness and peace, well, what do? Well, they go out and try and buy stuff to make themselves happy, don't they? And it plays into this consumer game. It also plays into the fact if people are not talking and there's no social cohesion, well, there's no rise against the machine, is there? You know, you're just locked into your little bubble house, entertaining on your bubble games and communicating in your bubble phone. There's no, hang on guys, let's get together and let's discuss 5G. This is our children's future. Let's, this kind of thing. So Marty, listen, thank you ever so much for your time.
Oh, pleasure,
a wonderful and genuine man. I really appreciate you've spent the time to talk on the Bought the T-Shirt podcast. Where can people?
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me. Thank you.
Where can people find you, social media wise, or is LinkedIn best?
My website is martinwilson.com. My mum's so proud that the only website I couldn't get Marty Wilson, but martinwilson.com is my website. And on all the major social medias, I'm just M Wilson Speaks. So like Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those. It's just made it easier for everyone to be the same. M Wilson Speaks on all of them.
If you can just send me a little message with all your links, and I'll put them below the video. Funny little anecdote there. When I started writing, I thought, right, I want a .com, I don't want any of this .co.uk rubbish. I want a I want a .com address. And so I did one of the search engine things, the providers, and damn, ChrisThrall.com was taken. So I was gutted. And then, for reasons I can't even remember why, a year later, I just thought I'd just check, maybe that person changed their mind, and they had, and it was available. I went, I have it. And I did the same for my son. I bought him hisname.com. Probably an ego thing, isn't it? But, So, so I'll put your links below the video. If you just want to stay on the line, Marty, I'll do my official goodbye to our people at home, which basically means click off the record button. Right. So big love and massive respect to everybody at home. Please take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Friend, thank you for watching my video. I'm the only person I know that has ticked every item off my bucket list, and I did so coming back from chronic addiction with no help from anybody. Now I want to pass those skills on to you, but I can't help you unless you help me and hit the subscribe button. So please do so, and let's go and smash this world together.